Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Glen Howard. I'm president of the Jamestown Foundation. It's our great pleasure to have you here today for our discussion Iran and turmoil and its implications for its neighbors. I've been excited about this event because of the two experts we have appearing today. This is the third event as a part of our Terrorism Watch Week that we have annually every year. And so we wanted to have a panel this year on the situation inside Iran and kind of discuss what is happening inside there and kind of understand what is happening internally, and then also what are the external challenges it presents for U.S. policy in the region. So we're really happy to have this discussion. It's been 3 months of protests inside of Iran. And today we had another a person was killed. His name was, I forget his name, but the protester was hung this morning. And this whole event started off, series of events started on September 16th with 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was killed while in the custody of Iran's morality police. We just finally saw these recent events in Iran kind of take a lull last week with the decision to abolish or to at least to restrain the morality police. So we're certainly seeing a very tumultuous series of events in Iran, and we certainly want to kind of assess where it's going there. And so we're just happy that you're able to join us virtually, and some of you that are here today in person at Jamestown's offices here in Washington, D.C. Our first speaker will be Alex Vatanka, who is director of the Iran program and founder of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute. He's also a senior fellow at the Frontier Europe Initiative. Alex has been a very prominent expert on the region for quite a while, and he's started off with writing about for Jane's Defense Weekly Information Group previously. He was born in Tehran. He has a BA in political science from Sheffield University in the UK and an MA in international relations. He is author of several books on Iran. The most recent one is he's working on his third book. His first book was working with Jamestown. The title of the book you see here was oh my gosh, Alex, you have to correct me. I don't see it here.
The first one or the second one?
The first one.
The first one was easy. Iran and Pakistan.
Right, Iran and Pakistan. And then the other one, with the second one you did, was on Iran's foreign policy.
The Battle of the Ayatollahs.
The Battle of the Ayatollahs. So he has a new book coming out called Understanding New Proxy Wars 2022. He's working on his third book, Iran's Arab Strategy, Defending the Homeland or Exporting Khomeiniism. Our next speaker is the one and only and distinguished senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute, Dr. Michael Doran. He has a regular series podcast called Realignment. He's been a very prominent speaker in Washington, D.C. He served in the Bush administration, where he was a senior director for Middle East policy at the National Security Council. And he's been quite a prolific writer. His last book was Ike's Gamble, which was about President Eisenhower's Middle East strategy and the Suez Crisis in 1956. He's also a native of Kokomo, Indiana, and where he went to elementary school in Carmel outside of Indianapolis. So like many people in Washington, he's come to us a long ways from the America's heartland. He also previously received a BA from Stanford University, MA, PhD from Princeton University in their Near Eastern Studies department. So we're very delighted everybody's here today. Alex, we wanted you to kind of talk about Iran being in turmoil, what has been happening internally. I think one of the questions that many people are asking is the Iranian regime in its final days? Or is this going to be more of the same? Will this keep continuing inside of Iran with Iran in turmoil and nothing is going to change? So I guess that's kind of where we're going. I want to hear your perspectives on that. So.
Sure. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Mike, great to see you again. I mean, I'll try and answer that question, Glenn, as part of my set of remarks that I prepared. I actually sort of did a slideshow for myself just to give my mind a structure, and I asked a question to what you just said, the beginning of a revolution, question mark. So, I've watched, born in Iran, lived through the revolution, professionally covered the country for the last 20 years, and we've seen many rounds of protests. So I think it's easy for us to dismiss these latest protests and say, we've been here before. This is not the beginning of revolution. This regime is pretty capable of repression. And yet, I think this is different. And I like to get into some of the points that I think are important when we talk about why this round of protests are different than earlier ones we've seen in 2020, 2019, 2018, or 2017. You like me that much?
Yes, I want you to get closer, but don't tell my wife.
And I do want to sort of get into the issue of whether this is an opportunity for the regime. So bear with me. What I'm saying is, if the regime does survive the protest, is this an opportunity for the regime to change course and go in a different direction? I think there are reasons to argue that might be the case. So there are three things I'd like to touch upon. One is the domestic realities facing the Islamic Republic. And then secondly, I want to talk about Iran's regional investments and endgame plans. I won't get into too much detail. I understand, Mike, you will be speaking to that as well. And then the third point I wanted to get to is global power politics. Russia, China, and Tehran's hopes about coming global power restructuring and where the Islamic Republic would like to ideally see itself fit. Let me start off with the first set of points on domestic realities. Number one to remember is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is the one individual. If you had to blame someone for the state of affairs, there's one individual you should blame, and his name is Ali Khamenei. He's been the supreme leader since June of 1989. Very few people out there have been in power as long as that. So he will turn to different individuals in the regime, including maybe even Ibrahim Raisi, who's essentially a non-factor, but he'll look for different individuals to blame. But the reality is there's nobody who's been in charge as long as he, and therefore he is responsible essentially for what is going on. He has created a build-up anger in society. I think he's lost many opportunities over the course of the last 30 plus years since being supreme leader to change course. You really don't need to look hard at Iranian society, if you look back since 1989 to today, to see the various indicators how angry the public have been for so long. They want to change. And Khamenei, surely as intelligent as he must be, I assume his intelligence, he's been in part of the system since 1979. He rose to the top position when nobody expected him to become supreme leader. So I don't want to question the man's intelligence, but I do want to question why he missed so many opportunities to reform from within gradually and avoid getting to the point where we are, where you have people in the streets demanding change and chanting death to the dictator. And again, let's not for a second lose sight of the fact that when people talk about the dictator, they're referring to one man, Ali Khamenei. Lots has been said. I've been talking about Generation Z in this town since February of, not since February, since September of this year when the last round of protests started. Again, I know most of you know what Generation Z is about, but I just want to emphasize this is a young generation of Iranians, mostly born in the late 1990s and after. They are, in the age group of 15 to 20, 25. That is the demographic that has been mostly in the streets, been most vocal, been mostly arrested and killed. Some 60 plus children have been killed by this Islamist regime. And this is a demographic that I like to describe in 2-3 words, but it's hopeless. It really doesn't seem to have much hope for the future. And it's also fearless. And I think that is a very important combination. They're hopeless. Even if there's a nuclear deal tomorrow in the Islamic Republic, if you ask the members of Generation Z in Iran, they'll tell you, so what? So what if there's a nuclear deal? So what if Iran can trade freely? So what if we can, reduce tensions with the West? We have an Islamist system on top of us that simply is alien to our way of life. They don't represent Iranian culture. They don't represent Iranian society. They certainly don't represent the hopes and aspirations and the worldview of this demographic, which is very different from previous generations. If you, I don't know, Glenn, we have a question, but I don't know if you want to wait to the end.
I can wait.
Yeah. Please wait till the end.
Yeah.
Okay, this is about Gen Z.
So I'll come back to it. Please don't forget that question.
Global definition of Gen Z, I think would be relevant here.
Sure. So, if you want to compare, for example, 2022 to 2009, the Green Opposition Movement, 2009, this was a split within the regime, essentially. The Green Opposition Movement leaders, people like Hussein Mousavi and Nick Karoubi, who've been under house arrest for the last 11 years, they weren't people from the streets. They were people from the regime that fell out, and they were essentially the powers that mobilized a good part of Iranian society, and you had Green Opposition Movement. This time around is very different. There are no leaders to speak of, and that's good or bad thing. But my point is, this is very much coming from the anger you find in Iranian society. State of the regime, and I want to focus specifically on two entities: the Office of the Supreme Leader of Ali Khamenei and the IRGC, Islamic Revolution Guards Corps. This is the entity in Iran that keeps the regime in power. It's armed, it has its own intelligence branch, it runs about 20-30% of the economy, who knows, and is very much vested in the survival of the regime. Again, for 33 years, these two entities, Khamenei and the IRGC, have had opportunities to change course, and yet they've decided to go essentially in the opposite direction, to amass more power, more economic riches, and so on. So this has resulted, and I think one of the last things they did, which really created a lot of anger in Iranian society, was how in 2021 they forced Ebrahim Raisi on people in the Islamic Republic. Ebrahim Raisi, as you know, was a very relatively unknown figure, but Khamenei and IRGC decided he was somebody they wanted as part of their political calculations. And what did Raisi do when he came in? Raisi started doing exactly what resulted in the death of Mahsa Amini, enforcing mandatory hijab and aiding cost. So-called morality police increased, they got more funding and so on. In other words, what I'm saying is, instead of listening to the people, the two entities that have most power in the system, Khamenei, IRGC, went in the different direction, believing that you can suppress any opposition that comes your way. I don't know if we want to have time to get into the idea of general strikes and defections. We haven't seen the major general strikes yet. This could be a game changer if it doesn't happen. We've seen some general strikes, but nothing major. Certainly nothing that we saw in 78, 79 when the Shah fell. The other thing, we haven't really seen major defections from the ranks of the regime. We've seen a lot of chatter. We've seen a lot of people expressing the need for the Islamic Republic to reinvent itself. Some people are talking about the need to create Islamic Republic 2.0. But these are vague ideas. The idea of free elections being mentioned again and again, the idea of reducing the powers of the supreme leader. And again, I have to emphasize, these are people within the regime who are speaking for the need of change and reform, but you just don't know how serious this is. Because what the Islamic Republic is very good at is when they're under pressure, they come out and they make certain promises. Oh yeah, there are things we can do differently, we promise. But once people are off the streets, guess what happens? We go back to the same old bad practices. State of the opposition, very quickly, both at home and in the diaspora. I think the state of the opposition inside of Iran is frankly dismal. I mean, I would say the opposition inside Iran doesn't matter and hasn't mattered for a long time. So if people want to talk about reform, point to one reformist leaders that matters, including Mohammad Khatami, including Hassan Rouhani, including people like Javad Zarif. They don't matter, because essentially what has happened is the protest movement is way ahead of them and has no time to compromise with people like, as I said, Khatami and so on, who are essentially seen by the Iranian street as believers in the Islamic Republic. They don't want to change it. They want to maybe tinker with on the margins, but not want to change it. Whereas the demand from the street is that the whole system as a whole has to go, because there's no hope for it to be reformed. The opposition in diaspora, very quickly, it's huge, it's capable, it's resourceful, it's energized, it's committed, it has the international community behind it. One thing, and I'm not sure if this is good or bad, it doesn't necessarily have one leader or one agenda. And this is something they need to think about hard if they want to keep perhaps sending a message of support to the people inside of Iran. Because I think at some point, I mean, we're entering the 4th month of these protests. At some point, we have to start questioning, particularly as we enter Iranian winter in the big cities up north, Tehran, so on. Winter is going to be a factor. How often are people going to be willing to stay in the streets? And as Glenn, you pointed out in your introductory remarks, the regime has started now executing. They've killed about 450, but now they're making a public display of hanging people. So obviously they're going after not the kids in the streets, the younger folk, but they're going after the parents in the sense of saying, if you don't watch your kids, then there will be punishment for entire families.
So the public hanging is more of a messaging to the parents to get their kids under control.
Public hanging in Islamic Republic has always been as a way of creating intimidation and deterrence. And that has been true for political activists, although they haven't done that for a long time. And I don't think they would kill openly. I'm not sure if they would, but I'm not sure if they would take pride in killing political opposition members by hanging them in public. I think this individual that was hanged, Rahnavard, he was accused to have killed two Basij paramilitary members. State of the economy, very quickly again, I've spoken already longer than I intended to, but remember the state of the economy again is dismal. And this underpins everything that you see come on the streets. So yes, the cultural issues, the mandatory hijab, the fact that this is a regime that doesn't understand its own youth, these are real problems. But the fact that that same youth cannot have jobs and does not have access to opportunities is also that underlying factor that is pushing for that mobilized Iranian civil society to come on the streets. Again, I could talk about this at length if people are interested, but there is a sense in Iranian society that the country has fallen behind. It's fallen behind economically as well. And, they look at places like Saudi Arabia and other states in the Gulf states that are now moving ahead. They're not just changing some of their social cultural norms. For example, as you know, in Saudi Arabia, they removed mandatory hijab. They are giving more rights to their women, whereas the Iranian society feels their leaders are essentially no different than the Taliban next door in Afghanistan. In other words, very reactionary. A few points on Iran's regional endgame. You've had 10 years of Arab Spring, and at this point, Iranian policymakers are still trying to figure out what their strategy is. For a long time, their strategy in the region was a so-called forward defense, that you better fight ISIS and your enemies out there in places like Syria and Iraq, so you don't have to fight in the streets of Tehran. All right, for a while that might have worked, but I can assure you that doesn't work anymore, certainly not with these Iranian protesters who find themselves in disagreement with what the regime is doing in the region. They feel the regime is pursuing these ideological projects of expanding its ideological sort of message to some of these receptive communities in the broader Middle East at the expense of nation building at home. So, and by the way, when you look at where Iran is successful today in terms of regional states, the Lebanons, the Iraqs, the Syrias, the Yemens of this world, what do they all have in common? They're all pretty much either failed or failing states. So even if you assume for a second that Iran is the winner in those theaters, the question Iranians are asking themselves back home is, so at what cost? What do we actually get out of it? What will the rebuilding of Yemen or Syria cost the Iranian citizens who are desperate in terms of their own demands that are not being met by the regime? And the final point, and I know, Glenn, you care about, and so does Mike, when the regime has been as focused on places like Syria and Iraq and Yemen, where have they lost sight? Places like the South Caucasus. So the Iranians have essentially now woken up to the fact that Mother Russia has been busy in Ukraine. Mother Russia is not doing what it used to do in the South Caucasus in terms of being the powerful actor, keeping everything together. The Turks and the Israelis have moved in. This is scaring the Iranians, and this all happened because they were not keeping an eye on their sort of northwest border. Now, again, I can talk about the South Caucasus. I know you too as well. But my point here is, there is a realization that there is something called immediate national security issues, and then there's something called faraway Lebanon in South Lebanon, in Dahi, in places that where you could choose to invest, you could choose for ideological reasons to commit yourself, but it's not necessarily going to defend Iranian national interest as if you say, for example, you're involved in much closer at home problems, essentially in the South Caucasus, in Afghanistan, and so on. Anyway, that's a point I think is important for us also to keep in mind. Few other points, and I move on to the last set of slides. Iran has, I like to put it this way, perhaps won the war, as some people like to say, in the region, in places again like Syria. but I'm not sure if it can keep pretending that it has won that war. I think the fear in Iranian policymaking community right now is, now that the ISIS is gone in Syria, what do we actually get to prove to our people that this was worthwhile investing in? In other words, when you're looking at the post-war phase, reconstruction phase in Syria, if you look at the companies that are involved, it's mostly not Iranian companies. You're looking at Turkish companies, increasingly Gulf companies, and so on. Even the Russians are doing better than the Iranians. So there is that issue of, we invested, we won the military aspect of our interventions, but what about the long term? Are we going to lose out to some of our regional rivals like Turkey? 2 points, and then I'll move on to the power global competition. In the region, I think one issue that really hasn't moved forward and is essential for the Iranian regime to push forward is their approach to the Arab world. I think, as desperate as Tehran is to reach some kind of a detente and breakthrough with the Saudis, they haven't given the Saudis and the Gulf states in general an opportunity or an offer that they can accept. And one of the key issues, I think, is Iran's insistence on the fact that if you are going to have a new regional security architecture in the Gulf region, the broader Middle East, the Iranian regime's insistence that the United States has to be out of that equation has been a non-starter for these Gulf states, and has been true for decades, pretty much since the first time the Iranians mentioned this. And the Iranian regime needs to, I think, seriously reconsider this. They might have a chance at some kind of a deeper understanding with the Gulf states if they take this issue of the United States off the table and don't insist that the Gulf states choose essentially Iran over the United States, because it's not going to happen, certainly not in the short term. Final point on the regional aspect, a lot of hope in things like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Russia, China, deeper ties with these entities. And I would say, yes, it's moving. Trade with Russia, for example, has gone from about $1 billion, $2 billion in the last 5 years to $4 billion. That's pretty significant. That's doubling of trade, but it's not going to compensate for all the economic losses that Iran is paying because of the sanctions regime that is essentially chosen itself to be under, because it doesn't have the political will to reach a solution to the nuclear file, which is the reason why the sanctions are on Iran in the first place. Okay. Final few points. Khamenei's big hope has been look east policy. I think that will stay the same in the foreseeable future. But I think, as all of you saw, the Iranians were horrified by the way the Chinese leader Xi in Saudi Arabia, basically, at least from an Iranian perspective, sided with the Gulf Arab states against Iran. You have seen nothing major happening on the economic front in the last few years between Iran and China, despite the fact that in 2016 they signed a so-called 25-year strategic deal. So the Iranian regime has been chasing, I wouldn't call it a pipe dream, but I would say they've been exaggerating vastly what China can do for them. And suddenly they're realizing actually the Chinese are interested in various actors in the region, not just not interested in putting all their eggs in the Iranian basket. And I think President Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia really is a wake-up call for the regime. I don't know if this means that they're going to go back and reconsider their look east policy, but there are plenty of criticism in terms of how over dependence on China, but also Russia, is not necessarily the best way forward. The simple reality, though, is Russia and China have helped Iran survive so far. But again, to my point, will they be able to keep this regime, keep it afloat in the long term? I'm not sure that's the case. I think that's what I'm hearing when I listen to Iranian commentators, including folks within the regime who have their own questions. There's also an ideological challenge for the Islamic Republic in terms of getting closer to Russia and China. Iran's militant Islamism at some point is going to clash with Russia, and it's going to clash with the Chinese. So far, they've been able to sort of ignore the fact that this is a theocracy in Iran. This is an Islamic Republic with a mission of uniting the Islamic world. And the Iranians have been very good at sort of downplaying that when dealing with Russia and China in their bilateral relations. But at some point, as these states move closer, that will be an issue. So what my argument is, again, if Iran, Russia, and China, and this is in a perfect world, move in the direction of more convergence, particularly if they want to choose to be in the leaders in the anti-Western bloc, at some point you will probably find that it's going to be Iran that needs to change its ideological agenda more so than the Russians or the Chinese. So it needs to become more of an authoritarian nationalist state and far less of a militant Islamist state, because I think that militant Islamism is just simply too much for the likes of Putin and the Communist Party of China. And then let me say this is my final point, I promise. At Khamenei's death, he's 83. We don't know about his health. People have been forecasting his death for a long time, as long as I can remember. His death has been speculated in the pages of the New York Times recently. I listened to his speeches. He seems pretty sharp to me, but he's 83. And we're all human. And I think you can look at, certainly that's my day job. I look at individuals within the regime who are putting their political and personal survival now ahead of the Khamenei's happiness, essentially. So I would say if this repression works and the people are off the streets, watch out for a more serious, more significant infighting inside the Islamic Republic about the day after Khamenei dies, because Khamenei has represented what he has represented, which is his way, a very stubborn way of ruling over a country. Certainly, as I said, disconnected from the youth. But if you look at the generals in the IRGC, just to give you an example, IRGC has known about Generation Z's problems for at least 5 years. They've done studies, they've done surveys. They knew 5 years ago that the young in Iran are extremely dissatisfied and really willing and able to come out in the streets. You have to ask the question, why didn't do anything about it? Well, perhaps they couldn't. But then ask the question, what if Khamenei isn't there? What if the clerics have less power and others in the regime have more power? That is one option for the regime to perhaps extend its survival. But overall, this is a regime that I would argue a long time ago lost its way with its people and really has nothing to offer them, except as we see right now, intimidation, repression, killing of its own citizens to prolong its stay in power. Let me stop there, Glenn.
Well, certainly the staying power is a very important kind of, the larger question, and the United States is clearly, and this administration is invested a lot in trying to engage Iran. And so many people have claimed that that's a fool's errand and it won't go anywhere. But now Iran is in this turmoil. So Mike, you've been a long time observer of all things Iran. So what type of perspective, what's been going through your head and what it means for the Middle East and U.S. policy?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you, Alex. I listened to Alex talk, and it sounds like a nasty regime, repression, suppression, violence. But if you look at it from the White House, it gets nothing but love, right? It's really quite remarkable. There was an incredible opportunity here for the United States to put more pressure on the regime. I think it's an incredible opportunity both domestically inside Iran and in the region. But I see no sign whatsoever that the administration is interested in doing that. We saw just recently, last week, there was an interview by Jake Tapper of the Secretary of State, and Jake Tapper asked him, "Are you still negotiating? Yes, you say you're focused on the protests and not on the negotiations over the JCPOA. But does that mean you're not negotiating over the JCPOA right now? There are no negotiations going on." And Anthony Blinken very demonstrably avoided answering the question, which I mean must mean that there are negotiations going on. And of course, around the same time, he appeared at J Street, where he said that we, the administration, believe that diplomacy is still the best way to solve the problem of the nuclear question. Nobody ever follows up with the question, well, why do you believe that? What have you seen from Iran over the last year or 2 years since you've come to power, basically? What have you seen that has convinced you that diplomacy is going to work? And we have Iran attacking the United States, U.S. bases in the region, U.S. allies in the region. We have Iran violating its NPT and JCPOA obligations, enriching uranium up to 60%, all on the watch of this. The administration presents it as if that was a response to Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign, but of course the enrichment to 60% began under the Biden administration, not under Trump. And then we have the demonstrations, and then now we have the growing strategic relationship between Russia and Iran, the sale of missiles, drones, and apparently missiles to Russia, and we're hearing now reports of co-production with the Russians, and that's at a moment when apparently the number one priority of the administration is to stop Russia in Ukraine. It's really remarkable. You have Iran providing drones to Russia to strike NATO assets or NATO provided assets in Ukraine, and the United States will not provide drones to the Ukrainians. But not only will it not provide drones to the Ukrainians, it won't take any countermeasures against Iran, and it's really striking. So the administration prefers clearly the policy of endless negotiations with Iran, pointless negotiations with Iran, to the alternative. The alternative is what? It's maximum pressure of Donald Trump. It doesn't want maximum pressure, I think, for 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is it doesn't want to take Iranian oil off the market. It is the administration came in believing erroneously that if it embraced Iran and kissed it on both cheeks, the Iranians would embrace them back and love them. And so in order to make a demonstration of goodwill, it immediately relieved sanctions. So it's never really been negotiating with Iran. It's just been engaging it, and engaging it not like a rogue nation, but like a nation that it believes it can come to a strategic accommodation with. And the Iranians, this allowed them to have the best of both worlds. They can sell oil to China like the JCPOA is in place, and they can enrich uranium like as if they're not restricted by the JCPOA in any way. So that's a beautiful. If you're Ali Khamenei, that's a beautiful position to be in. You get the best of both worlds. He's not convinced. He's already lived through Khamenei. He's already lived through the imposition of maximum pressure once, so he knows. And the JCPOA. So he knows that because of the deep disagreement in the United States about the JCPOA, there's no guarantee that return to the JCPOA is going to return that much business to Iran. In order to get the levels of business that would really could be a change in calculus for him, he would have to change the regime in significant ways and provide guarantees to the West that he's never ever going to provide them. So in the absence of that, this is the best of all possible worlds. So that's one reason that the administration doesn't want to get more aggressive with Iran is, as I said, doesn't want to take the oil off of the market. The second reason is, and this I don't think has gotten nearly enough attention, despite my best efforts, Glenn. So
You got to try harder, Mike.
I'm asking you now. I want you to put all of the resources behind the Jamestown of the Jamestown Foundation behind making people read my latest article with your friend John Kasapoulou, Overmatch in Tablet Magazine. We also have a little synopsis of it in the Wall Street Journal. The Iranians in the last 5 or 6 years made amazing advances in drone and missile technology, which of course we're seeing in Russia. It's really quite remarkable. I mean, you have to give them credit for And I mean that seriously, I'm not even ironically, given all of the pressure they've been under with the sanctions, they made these remarkable advances in drone and missile technology.
Using Western parts.
Using Western, but they were doing it. They were making those advances without the Western parts too, though. They're very good at taking. Remember how they took all those shredded CIA documents and put them all back together.
Yes.
Apparently, Alex can
Same
explain.
element.
Alex can explain.
Reverse engineering.
No, Alex can explain it to us, but it's something I think it has to do with Persian miniatures,
Huh.
right? They learn how to do all this delicate little work, with CIA documents or with microchips. Anyway, they can do reverse engineering, but not only that. The really big innovation is that they have put drones and missiles together in very innovative ways. In which that overwhelm the defensive systems, even the top of the line best defensive systems that the United States can offer, because the ballistic missiles have different flight characteristics. They have different kinds of ballistic missiles. They have large numbers of different kinds, and the drones have different kinds of drones, and then they have cruise missiles as well. And they all have very different flight characteristics, and your systems have to focus in on one flight characteristic or another. And when you add them all together, they overwhelm the systems. And they know now that they have what the former commander of CENTCOM called overmatch. We've created in conventional weaponry in the Middle East. U.S. policy has created a balance of power that favors Iran's offensive, disruptive military capacity. And the only way to deter Iran effectively is to carry out offensive countermeasures. And the administration is dead set against doing that. And it will now, I'm going to come back to that in a second, because I want to mention the third factor about why it doesn't want to confront Iran. And then I'll come back to this issue of offensive countermeasures. The third reason is ideological. President Barack Obama began this. You remember when he told us from the podium that that we have a fatwa. You didn't know that. There's a fatwa preventing it's against the strictures of Islam to build a nuclear weapon. And Ali Khamenei gave us a fatwa. Nobody can find the text of it, but it's there. And it weighs on the heart of every Iranian. They don't want to have a nuclear weapon because it's against Islam. President Obama told us that from the podium. And he told us also that the stupid, stinking Republicans in the United States, warmongers, they are actually making an accommodation with Iran impossible. And that's why we have this conflict in the Middle East with Iran, is because we have these aggressive Republicans. But if we open-minded Democrats who understand that there's a fatwa reach out to the Iranians, we can reach an accommodation with them. So there's this path that Obama can see, and I think Brett McGurk and Rob Malley and Colin Kahl and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, they can all see it very clear. This path to accommodation with Iran that the stinking Republicans won't let them take. And so they have catechized their own progressive base, the Democrats, into believing that this path exists, and to believing that defense security-minded Republicans, Bibi Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, this dirty cast of characters, evangelical Christians, and so on, they are the ones who are causing conflict with Iran. Now, they don't want to, having catechized their base into believing that, they're now a prisoner of that system. Whether they now continue to believe that themselves or not, if they move against that idea and they renounce the negotiations and they go to maximum pressure, which they have, Tony Blinken just told us a week ago that the cause of all these problems we have right now with Iran is the result of maximum pressure by the orange demon, Donald Trump. So how can Blinken and Colin Kahl and Brett McGurk and Rod Malley and Joe Biden embrace the policy of the orange demon. Not possible. I mean, it's a political lift for them to do that. And back to the other issue of overmatch. It's especially difficult because if they do impose maximum pressure, Iran will respond in ways that we're very familiar with, which is disrupting shipping out of through the Straits of Hormuz, now with the Houthis in the Red Sea, attacking American bases and the bases of allies, using this disruptive military capacity that they have developed, which is really quite significant. And the only way to answer that, as I said, is with offensive countermeasures. If the administration goes that route, goes maximum pressure, Iran responds predictably in the way that it will, then we will have to build up our force in the Middle East because we have denuded the American force in the Middle East. My friend Rob Greenway, my colleague at Hudson, who served as was in charge of Middle East policy in the Trump administration, he has seen behind the secret door. I haven't. I no longer have a security clearance. And he has said publicly in our events that we had over the last decade, we have seriously removed forces from the Middle East. The Iranians, of course, are very familiar with this, I'm sure. And so there would have to be a major political lift against the progressives who've been catechized to believe that there's this path to Sugar Mountain with the Iranians. And it would also require building up forces, which would kind of double the political effort needed. They don't want to do that. The Pentagon is focused on the Ukraine war and also concerned about Taiwan. And that's the purpose, ultimately, I mean, from a defense point of view, from a defense policy point of view, that's the purpose of the endless negotiation with Iran. It's to kind of keep the Middle East quiet. And maybe it's on a little low boil, but it's at an acceptable level of violence right now, perpetrated by the Iran and its proxies, because upsetting that is going to be very inconvenient in the current moment. So if you're sitting now, they understand all of this extremely well in Tehran. They have been studying us forever, and the same cast of characters basically has been there. As Alex said, Ali Khamenei has been there since 1789, since the United States began, basically. So they understand us better than we understand ourselves. Because people I remember how when I came into the White House and I was involved in Iran sanctions, I was so excited, and I thought, we're really going to put the screws to them. And I just see how they run circles around this all the time, because it's a lot harder to change this than you think. I'll just say a few more statements about what's going on around the region. When they look out from Tehran and they see, oh, well, we've got the Americans in our pocket. That's great. And clearly there's once they provided missiles and drones to Russia and we didn't do anything in response, they thought, okay, yeah, we've got those guys, right? That's it. They're not going to ship until, I don't know what Ali Khamenei would have to do to get some kind of offensive countermeasure from the Americans. I think he could go out and insult Biden's mother and Biden wouldn't do anything. Now, if he insulted Barack Obama's mother, maybe that would be a problem for the Americans. I don't know, but it would have to be such a strong effort to insult them that I don't think we're going to see that. They're not that dumb. So he's got that. What he doesn't have are the Turks and the Israelis. That's where it starts to get interesting, because those are the only two players.
Or the Azerbaijanis.
Coming to that. The Turks and the Israelis are the only two players who have the ability to carry out offensive countermeasures against the Iranians, and their policies have converged somewhat. Now, if we had in the White House people who didn't believe in Sugar Mountain in rainbows and lollipops with the Iranians, there's an enormous amount to work with there. Let's just start. Let's start actually with Syria, not the South Caucasus. If Russia is now very weak in Syria, Russia is weak, and you can see President Erdogan is negotiating with the Russians, primarily this tension about moving into northeastern Syria it gets a lot of it creates some tension with Washington. But the areas he's actually focused on moving into are ones where where the friction is with more with Russia than with the United States.
And you're referring to the discussed Turkish offensive into northern Syria.
A Turkish offensive in northern Syria. But why is he thinking of this now? Because he sees that Putin is weak. Putin has been the Russian military has been exposed to be much weaker than we ever thought it was, and this offers the Turks opportunities to expand their influence in Syria. Now, imagine if again the Iranians. Not that they deserve it. I mean, I tend to agree with Alex that this is an ugly regime that does very ugly, nasty things. But if you have the rose-colored glasses of the White House, you see something else. And so they can benefit from this American policy, which doesn't look for opportunities to squeeze them. So the Americans are not thinking about working with the Turks to squeeze the Iranians in Syria, but they could very easily. Turkish-US relations have improved as a result of the Ukraine war, and Putin has weakened, and also Turkey has improved relations with Israel. So you could imagine theoretically an American policy that would work with Israel and Turkey to squeeze Iran from north and from south. And that could be relatively easy. It wouldn't require American forces at all, because the Turks and the Israelis could do it on their own. So the Iranians are worried about that. How do we know they're worried about that? Because they carried out these terror attacks against Israeli targets in Turkey, and that was designed to drive a wedge between Turkey and Israel. So they're thinking about it, but it isn't actually happening at the moment. More frustrating to them, I think, is what's happening in the South Caucasus, as Alex mentioned, because there the potential of Turkish and Israeli capabilities is showing itself in Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijanis managed to do what Washington has not figured out how to do, or has not had the imagination to do. And that is that they have taken Turkish and Israeli capabilities and married them together. And they have this very powerful alliance. Russia is receding from the South Caucasus. It doesn't have the ability to impose its will like it has in the past. The Azerbaijanis and the Turks feel that. I just came back from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a nation rising. You can feel it in many ways. And President Aliyev said to a group that I was part of, basically, I'm not negotiating. These were not his direct words, but this was the implication. I'm not negotiating with the Armenians. I'm negotiating with Vladimir Putin, and I can do that because I have the Turks at my side. Turkey is an independent power. It doesn't have to ask permission from anyone. The Turks and the Azerbaijanis want to build the Zangezur corridor. That's this economic and transport corridor across Armenia that the Armenian leader Pashinyan agreed to in the tripartite agreement that ended the war in 2020. But they are now what he agreed to on paper in 2020, in November 2020, he's now trying to undo through negotiations. The Russians are weak, and the Iranians are trying to move into the breach by threatening Azerbaijan, doing military exercises on the border, and so on. And I think from the Iranian point of view, it's kind of a double threat from the rise of Azerbaijan, or rise of the Azerbaijani-Turkish alliance, or I should say actually the triangular alignment of Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Israel. It's kind of a double threat, because about between 1/5 and 1/3 of all Iranians are ethnic Azerbaijanis. President Aliyev said at a recent meeting of the Organization of Turkic States that we, that is Azerbaijan, are concerned not just about the security of Azerbaijanis inside Azerbaijan, but also outside. And so that was a clear signal to the Iranians that we Azerbaijan are contemplating taking actions that will make your life more difficult on your streets with your Azerbaijanis. I think that has to strike a lot of fear into the hearts of the Iranian elite. I think more than almost anything else that's going on in the world. I believe that Zangezur corridor we're going to see it within a year. I was in Zangilan, which is at the corner, the south west corner of Azerbaijan, where Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran come together. And the number of trucks I saw out there building the railroad was really remarkable. I don't think countries put that kind of resources into building a railroad unless it's actually going to happen. And I believe that they do have the power to make it happen. So I'll be expecting to see that. That's very upsetting to the Iranians for all kinds of reasons. It basically it threatens them to become a kind of geopolitical barrier to a north-south transit from Iran northward, going up to Russia. It also makes Azerbaijan much less dependent on Iran. In order to get to Nakhchivan, the exclave of Azerbaijan, now you have to go through Iran, not through Armenia, to have a direct connection. So that dependence on Iran is completely ended. So there's an opportunity here, if the administration was ever to believe that it would be valuable to put pressure on Iran. There are partners out there to work with in Syria and in the South Caucasus, and particularly Israel, Turkey, Azerbaijan. But I don't think the administration is really thinking that way. But interestingly, it has moved as a result of the Ukraine war, not just toward Turkey certainly, but also it has developed a greater awareness of the importance of Central Asia, and of creating a corridor, an economic corridor, through which Central Asian goods, in particular oil and gas, can move westward, that isn't controlled by either Iran or Russia. And that can only go through one country, which is Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan is the gateway to Central Asia. Turkey and Azerbaijan recognize that this is a real historic opportunity. Iran and Russia haven't been so weak in the South Caucasus since the early 19th century. And so they are very, very much aware of it. And I think there's some awareness of that in Washington, that this would be a good thing. They're not thinking of it as part of an Iran strategy. They're thinking it as a way of opening up Central Asia, but it has all kinds of implications for Iran, which they have yet to really contend with. I think that the Iranians are very worried about this, and it could be potentially very interesting, but the U.S. has yet to wake up to it.
Thank you. That's a really interesting kind of overview of the dilemma for the Biden administration, the over eagerness to try to engage Iran. And I guess the question now is that now that the Biden administration and the U.S. have invested so much in Iran, and now that Iran is at this crossroads, what happens to the U.S. policy when Iran becomes unglued further? Alex, you had the first question here was about Generation Z inside Iran, how they would react. There's also 1/3 of the element of Iran is also Iranian Azerbaijani. So you've got that element as well. Is really Iran at a tipping point now, or do you? We're going to be entering 2023. So what do you see down the road here for what's going to happen in the next couple of months?
Well, look, I don't think we're at a point where we can start saying that the central government in Tehran has lost so much control that various ethnic communities might decide to, break loose, if you will. I fundamentally don't think Iran is that kind of a country. This is an imperial state. Azeris. I mean, I'm half Azeri, half Persian, have been part of this political entity, Persia, Iran, for centuries and centuries. So I would be careful in terms of, I understand what Mike is saying in terms of some of the certainly regime policies against ethnic minorities, particularly Sunnis. And we've seen most of the repression in Iran have happened in two regions, Kurdistan and Baluchistan, which happen to be both non-Persian and non-Shia. So there is definitely an issue of ethnic discrimination. Happens also to be the case to some extent when it comes to language rights for ethnic Azeris in Iran. But I think it's a leap to go from saying that's where we are to saying those 20 whatever million Iranian Azeris, and nobody has figures that are precise on that, are willing to, for example, let the Turks or the Israelis come in and mobilize them against the central government in Tehran. I don't think we're there yet, and I doubt we're going to get there anytime soon. I can tell you, Mike, Iranian society, by and large, from what I understand, has an issue with the Islamic Republic of Iran and its policies. They don't necessarily have an issue with coexisting with one another in the borders of Iran as it is. So, that to me limits how much the utility as a policy or instrument, the utility, how much you can push this. And I have to say, if the United States plays that card, it fits right into the narrative of the Islamist regime in Tehran, that here's the United States trying to break Iran down. They don't care about Islamic Republic of Iran or the nuclear issue. They don't like the idea of Iran as a powerful state, and they will break this place down. And that's the narrative of the regime. So the U.S. has to be very careful how it plays the ethnic card. We've seen it before. Last time the ethnic minorities were up in arms in a significant way was in '79.
But many people have said that many of the demonstrations now are also in Kurdish areas of Iran. And many people have implied that it's also kind of a Kurdish uprising of sorts. I'm not emphasizing that, but some people have hinted at that.
Definitely, there's an element that they're asking for more rights, certainly be treated better than they are, because the central government in Tehran has treated the peripheries much. I mean, by and large, the regime in Tehran looks at its citizens as security threats above anything else. Right? It's not looking at them as citizens that deserve services. It looks at them as potential security threats. That's true if you're Tehran, it's true in Baluchistan and Kurdistan and Khuzestan, but it just happens to be much more true in some of those border regions and the Kurds and so on. But again, I want to go back to a point. I think we have to be very careful in terms of imagining where Iran is today is ripe for outside powers to go in. The central government certainly isn't that weak. And I mean, we haven't seen a single defection, a single prominent Azeri or Kurdish leader who has come out and said separation from Iran is what we want. Even Kurdish militant groups that are based in northern Iraq in the KRG region aren't speaking the language of separation and disintegration of Iran. What they have an issue with is the policies of the Islamic Republic. The quickest fix is to have either this regime removed or significantly change its policies. That's what they want, as I said, including leftist Kurdish organizations. Now, the other point I would raise on ethnic Azeris is, I mean, I don't follow Azerbaijan. I visited the Republic of Azerbaijan. I know roughly what the policies of the country are. And I can see over the last 2 decades plus, we've had many times where Iran and Azerbaijan have had these disputes where Iran says something, Azerbaijan replies. But the idea that President Aliyev in Baku is ready to involve himself in the politics of Iran, in Tabriz, in Ardabil, in Urumiyeh, and so on, and get involved and say, I'm going to go after the Islamic Republic by using the Azeris of Iran against the regime. I haven't seen any serious evidence of that. If that is true, Mike, then we're talking. Yeah, this is. I know.
You didn't say you didn't say it the way you said it.
Right. No,
but that's just within the last month, and that's a huge change.
it is a huge change.
And it's coming from on high, and he said it at the meeting of the Organization of Turkic States,
Right.
which gives it an added emphasis.
It would be one point, Glenn, before you, sorry, and I just want to say, if that is true, if let's say the Azeris are now willing to, and as I said, it's a big if, but you were there, you heard the president of Azerbaijan say If that is true, then it's a real policy dilemma for the United States, because now we're talking about engineering on a scale that we haven't seen in the Middle East. This is, I mean, Iran and Azerbaijan together as one country, it's Spain size. It's 30 million plus people. We're talking about redrawing the boundaries in ways we haven't seen for certainly since, going back to the First World War. So I mean, it's just a lot of questions. Yeah.
Part of
Can I-
this,
can I,
go ahead.
Can I sort of respond to that, just because I think it's useful to make a few distinctions. Here's how it looks to me from a distance. I don't know Persian, I don't know Turkish, I don't know Azerbaijani. So, and I haven't been to Iran, so it's very hard to know what's going on the ground. But I talk to people in Azerbaijan who are talking to people in Iran all the time. And it's interesting to hear what they say. They say that the majority of Azerbaijanis in Iran are apolitical. And they're not thinking about autonomy, secession, or anything else. But there is a group of let's just say 15% of the population that is politicized, and a very significant percentage of them want autonomy of some kind. There is a general sense among the Azerbaijanis of a need for language rights, schooling, and in their own language and so forth, which they are denied. And that was the thing that President Aliyev put emphasis on, was the schooling, the language, and also the repression in Iran. Nobody here is talking. I'm not talking about the United States having a policy at all about Azerbaijani rights inside, ethnic rights inside Iran. I'm talking about the United States supporting this complex of Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Israel. And Azerbaijan has gotten in the last decade stronger, much stronger than it has ever been since independence, and it's going to get stronger. It is a rising power, and together I think Turkey is also a rising power. That is just by nature, that is going to have an impact inside Iran. And Alex mentioned the possibility of where, if this Islamic Republic reforms, what does it become? And Alex, you mentioned in passing a nationalist state. Does that mean the Iranian nation or the Persian nation? Because what I understand from talking to Azerbaijanis who are talking to Azerbaijanis in Iran, there's a growing sense among the young people in Iran, the young Azerbaijanis, of a desire for a greater connection to their Azerbaijani and Turkic roots. They're consuming media from Azerbaijan and from Turkey, and they want a greater connection with their ethnic roots, which doesn't necessarily mean autonomy, independence, whatever, but it's a real thing there. If we have Persian nationalists, on the other hand, is what you said, that what the regime is going to do, I think what it's already doing, right, with the Kurds, is it's saying to the Persians, after me, the deluge. If we go down, you Persians go down with us, and then the ethnic minorities, the ethnic minorities take over. That's also a double-edged sword, because it may get you a certain amount of, buy you a certain amount of sympathy, or at least non-opposition from the Persian sector of the country, but it will alienate the minorities. So they're walking on a knife's edge. I think it's really quite difficult for them. And one of the things that I find, it's very hard in Washington to talk about this issue seriously with anyone, because all of the Iran expertise in Washington is ethnically Persian, and the topic of the minorities is a taboo topic among them. So the minute you
I have to disagree with you on that, Mike. Okay, I can name, I don't want to name them, but I can give you a long list of my friends who are Iran watchers who are full or half Azeris.
But are they willing to talk to me about ethnic politics in Iran? Because if so, come to Hudson Institute. We'll do. Look, there's a serious argument to be made, a very serious argument to be made that Iran is a nation, a multi-ethnic nation, and that the Azerbaijanis of Iran do not have any desire to leave Iran and feel themselves to be part of Iran. But there clearly is also an alternative argument that these nations are subordinate to the Persians and unhappy with it. And regardless of whether you adopt this view of Iran or that view of Iran, and I don't know which one is correct, I really don't. There's a question here, as Alex himself said. The violence in Baluchistan, the violence against the Kurds, also the violence against the Ahvazis, is nothing like the violence against the protesters from Persia, from the Persian protesters or the Azerbaijani protesters. So this needs to be analyzed. How is Khamenei thinking about this ethnic question? I would love to talk to people about it, but it's a taboo topic, and it is a taboo topic. Alex, you cannot. I have a lot of experience in trying to talk to people about this, and the minute you raise it, you are accused of the United States.
Well, we are
the United States to crack up Iran. And so on, and I just think the policy community.
But we are having a discussion on a taboo topic here in Jamestown. No.
But one quick point on that.
Let's-
From MEK to the monarchists, to everyone in between, the idea of Iran disintegrating, which is why people don't really want to have that conversation right now. One is you label the traitor right away.
Exactly.
But the other thing is there is this desire to see change that is inclusive, that the nation doesn't, because I mean, look, the regime right now is playing with which card? Every time you talk about change, they talk about, you want this place to be the next Syria? So they do want to see some of the ethnic Kurds with arms and maybe even a few Azeris, although we have no evidence that Azeris are picking arms. But this is what the regime wants. Violence is what the regime
It
wants.
helps them. Yeah, no.
Violence is what they want.
We have a two-finger question in the
Can
back.
I just
So
quickly say one thing in response? Sorry,
Yeah.
very quickly in response. I understand, Alex, and I don't disagree. But from the point of view of the Iran analysis establishment
Right.
in Washington, it's never the right time to talk about the ethnic minorities. Never. Not now and not when things are.
well, I mean, in certain sense, you got the problem with Russia too in Washington. Very few people talk about
Most
ethnic
Iranian kings have come from Azerbaijan, including this. He's not a
Shah
king.
Ismail.
Yeah, I mean, this Ali Khamenei is half Azeri. Everyone knows Ali Khamenei is half Azeri. So, I think it's a really valid point, needs to be discussed. I hope it's not a taboo. But it's just, right now, I wonder if it's the. Yeah, I just want to say, I don't see much appetite right now, even in Iranian opposition, which is focused on key demands. What are the key demands? They want referendum about the future. They haven't decided what the referendum question should be, but I don't see the issue of ethnic, separation as top of the list. Ethnic rights within Iran, yes, but ethnic separation, I don't see. Yeah.
Again, I didn't call for any of that.
No, I know.
I
know
said-
you did.
I said there's a rising power on Iran's north. Iran has one, I was just on the border, on the Aras River. There's one border that Iran has that's really quiet. And that's its northern border. That's not because they love each other. That's because because Iran is seriously deterred from Iran would love to turn Azerbaijan into Iraq or Syria the way it's done, or Yemen. It would love to do that. It likes to have defense through chaos, but it can't do it. It can't do it. It can't do it not simply because the regime is too strong in Azerbaijan, but because it fears a backlash among its own Azerbaijan.
Okay, let's go to the back. We had a question. Can you just please identify yourself?
Robert Dyer. I view what you just said, it's one card to play. You're having a long discussion about Azerbaijanis within Iran, and that's not talked about outside of here. You're very correct. But we do hear about the Kurdish, and the Sunni minorities heard that for 30, 40 years. Back to the nuclear, I read years ago that there's a person saying when a camel puts its nose under your tent, you've got something going on. It's a negotiating standpoint. And the more we put sanctions on in any administration, whether they have nuclear weapons or not, program or not, they use it as a negotiating ploy. And what do they want? They want to be legitimized by the West economically and everything. We were not cooperating with Iran before they had a nuclear program. So I just say, yeah, when you talk to Persian people in this town, I start to say that saying, they all smile, and that's it. It's a negotiating tactic from the bazaar.
Go ahead.
I just have another question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
If it's okay to move away from the Syria question, I had a couple questions for Alex. First question was, why do you think that there have been major strikes in the current program? And then the second question is, in the game of Syrian reconstruction, why is Iran doing so poorly? And thank you both for really excellent work.
So question is about Iranian strikes and the other part was about reconstruction.
Yeah, no, thank you. Major strikes, why haven't we had major
Why
strikes?
haven't we had it?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. We do know that, labor organizations in Iran over the last many years have often come out and mobilized politically against the authorities. So why not now, when every segment of society is out? There has been some strikes. I mean, the bazaar has shut down for a few days here and there, but nothing like, a general strike where nobody comes out for a few days. This is something that the Iranian opposition is thinking about, trying to find ways to encourage that. I don't think they have come up with a solution yet. But again, this goes back to the point I made earlier that the opposition, in terms of what it can offer the Iranians inside of Iran, really needs to be clear about its agenda, what it can do for them, what it stands for, but also what it expects to be done by Iranians inside of Iran. General strikes and handicapping the Iranian economy is one of those things. Now, I have to say, I mentioned the Gen Zs and the younger crowd. By and large, these are not the ones that get up because the opportunities to work aren't there. So you could make the argument, I'm speculating, you could make the argument that they can go in the streets, the university protesters, student protesters, they don't have much to lose in that sense. But there's a silent majority that still to this day, despite all the sanctions and economic pain, fear whatever they have, they might lose in a political crisis moment where things can go anywhere. So you have a majority of Iranians who haven't decided to join the protesters. And how you bring him on board, that's a critical issue for anybody who wants the protest movement to succeed. And that would include things like coming out and striking and letting their voices be heard that way. In terms of the Syrian reconstruction, I can only give you data. I mean, for example, the last set of data I saw was that Turkey, this is from an Iranian official source, the Turks had about 38% of the market share in Syria, Iran at 4%, which is quite amazing. But yeah, you can explain some of that by geography. Turkey's got a border. You can put things on the back of a truck and get it into Syria. Which part of Syria this market analysis covered, I don't know. The sort of northern parts of Syria, obviously where Turks are much more influential. I don't know the exact details, but there are some obvious things I could point to. For example, if Iranian companies are involved, what about financing? Who brings the money on? What about access to banks? The Iranian economy in itself is off the international financial grid because of sanctions. So there are all sorts of limitations that the Iranian economy is facing because of the sanctions that would make him a difficult, to say the least, economic partner. But then again, they can use their muscle on the ground and the political connections for certain projects. For example, the telecom market in Syria, where the IOGC linked companies are pretty active, right? It's not all going to be lose or loss for Iran, but I don't think they are equipped to play the game that the Turks can play when it comes to economic projects going forward. I don't know if that answered your question, but I think, you know, my point earlier was the regime has for a long time been facing this criticism. You invest money we don't have in places like Syria. What do we get for it? You said for a long time we fight ISIS in Syria. We're better off doing that in Syria than in Iran. Now ISIS is largely gone. Why are we still in Syria? Why are we still investing in that country? What do we get for it? Then the Iranian regime started talking about potential money that could be made in this market called Syria. And then you haven't really been able to prove the evidence where the money's been made. And probably it's because the money isn't actually being made, not as of today.
We have one on there, and we perhaps combine that with his Gen Z question as well.
Yes.
I'll let you direct.
So the question from Matthew Kennedy: over what issues do Iranian Generation Zers, millennials, and Xers share similar and different views towards Iran's current political and economic climate?
And then if you want to perhaps tack on your Gen Z.
Yes, well, my question is the universal, by the way, John Burrell of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, we're neighbors with the Jamestown Foundation, this building, we're on the 7th floor, so thank you for having this and thank you for the great presentation. My question was just, well, first an observation that Gen Z universally is called that because it is the generation that grew up with the internet. They're internet babies. They were born in 1995 and 96 when the internet, was becoming common, for every household to have. So they've never known life, without the internet. And I don't know, what the Iranian regime's censorship, if it's as extensive as say China's is, but do you think the fact that they, have this internet exposure their whole lives would give them, a different outlook, more critical of the regime than, the older generations?
No, absolutely, that's the case. And that's not me saying it. That's the Islamic Republic, various institutions that do surveys and analyze this issue are saying. They're saying openly that this is a generation we don't understand. This is a generation that's been, growing up with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the world out there that they tried to keep out but couldn't. And keeping the internet out is not that easy. Technologically it might be easy to, and they do that occasionally. They just, reduce the speed. When there are protesters in the streets, they don't want people to communicate. They have an ability to reduce the speed of access to internet. For example, you cannot make simple WhatsApp calls when things are bad because the regime doesn't want the people in the streets to communicate with the outside world. But my point is, I think the number is 11 million Iranians are making money livelihood on Instagram, buying and selling on Instagram. So think about if you come out there and you do a blanket policy of no internet, what that does to, adding more angry people to the list of already angry people. So, but, bottom line is this is a generation that has no time for the Islamist ideology, wants to be part of the world, doesn't want to live in Ali Khamenei's Islamic civilization, whatever that is. Because really, I don't think Ali Khamenei himself really has a good idea what his Islamic civilization model stands for. Not certain when you look at his two biggest foreign partners, Russia and China, they're not in the business of Islamic civilization. So you have to question what it is Khamenei wants. I would also say overall the regime, not just in social media platforms, overall the regime has accepted and admits openly that they've lost the media war against the rivals outside, particularly not just in the United States, but also the likes of Saudi Arabia. I don't know who mentioned Iran International. The Saudis are supposedly funding Iran International. But overall, the Iranian regime, if you had time to kill and you wanted to watch Iranian TV sometime, anytime the last, I don't know, many, many years, you go on a channel and you hear a preacher saying things that really doesn't resonate with vast majority of young people in Iran or anywhere. So they haven't had a media strategy for a long time. And now they're paying the price for it. Are they going to be able to catch up? Are they going to be able to do things differently going forward? Maybe. But so far, their media strategy, both traditional media strategy, but also in terms of social media has failed them.
Well, I want to get to the neighbors part of our discussion today and discuss kind of a little bit about some of the regional dynamics. How are Iran's neighbors reacting to the turmoil inside of Iran? What is the Gulf reaction? Obviously, they've been investing a lot in normalizing relations with Israel. Michael brought up Netanyahu is coming back into this government. What would that mean would that mean more of an aggressive Israeli role in the region towards Iran, or how does that change the kind of the dynamic? So Alex, what's been your impression of the Gulf, and Mike, maybe talk about Israel?
I mean, I would say the Gulf states, after maximum pressure really was a disappointment for them. The Gulf states, by and large, expected a lot more from the Trump administration, the US in general, with the attacks on Abqaiq in 2019. And
Expected what from the US?
expected a kinetic American response. They feel that they have,
They killed Soleimani.
right, but
That's
they,
pretty,
yeah, I'm not sure if that
kinetic.
was in response to 2019. And, then you had the missile strike, the Houthi, not the Iranians, on Abu Dhabi, I think it was January 2020.
oh, that
Yeah,
aspect.
yeah. So there is this thing that, can we bank on the Americans? And it's not Democrat, Republican. It's a general question that they have in the Gulf states. And you don't see that just playing itself out vis-a-vis Iran. You see that, President Xi, I mean, he just had a massive summit with all the Gulf leaders, right? And other leaders from the Arab world. So the Arab world is questioning whether the United States has the appetite, the determination to stay in the long term and play the same role it's done in the past. And in the meantime, they're also trying to figure out if the likes of China and maybe even
Would
Russia.
you say that, are you kind of implying receding from the region? Is that they see the US kind of receding from the Trump administration and lack of attention by the US?
Receding, or even if not receding, I get the sense when I travel in the Gulf region that they're not sure about the US calculations and what the US wants to do. They're sort of wondering what it is the United States wants to do. And it goes back always to 2003. I mean, they would raise the issue of, why did you remove Saddam Hussein when you really hadn't thought about the consequences? They will go back to Mubarak. Why weren't you there for Mubarak in 2011? So I think some of those Gulf leaders, certainly that I have, or analysts that I've spoken to, will raise issues of that nature. But Mike, back to Iran. The Iranians obviously have been investing so much in the one critical Arab country for them, Saudi Arabia, and it's not going anywhere. The Saudis and the Iranians keep talking. For the Saudis, the one big price or demand is an Iranian change of course in terms of the support for the Houthis in Yemen, and the Iranians haven't been willing to give that. So the Iranians are insisting on things like reopening diplomatic relations, the Saudis returning to the embassy in Tehran and so on. And the Saudis aren't ready to do that. They're saying that would be symbolic. Why would we do that? Why would we reopen up our embassy in Tehran when we haven't received anything concrete back from Iran? So I think, I get the sense that, well, the Emiratis are ahead of the Saudis. They've actually returned their ambassador to Tehran. There is plenty of respect for Iran. There's plenty of respect for Iran as a potential spoiler. If you're sitting in Dubai or some of the other Gulf capitals, the proximity is pretty hard to ignore. And we heard Mike describe the missiles and the drones and the innovative ways Iran can bring some of those military assets to use. These are obviously things that the Gulf leaders do worry about. So yes, they don't like the Islamic Republic of Iran, but they've come to accept the basic reality. It's a neighbor that's not going to go anywhere. And frankly, it's a regime that's been there for 43 years and might be there for years to come still. That's their reading. So they're keeping their options open. I haven't seen any Gulf leaders, frankly, saying anything very overtly in support of. I haven't seen anything that has been classified as expressing support for the opposition protest movement in Iran, and that tells you something. But Mike,
except for Iran International, I mean that's
right? But
the
Saudis
Iranians
haven't publicly admitted that they support.
but everyone knows that it is,
Yeah.
and Iran is holding them responsible
right,
for that,
right.
threatened them on the basis of that.
Yeah.
But I agree with everything that Alex said about the. I'll get to Israel in a second. Just I
Go ahead.
heard everything he said about the lack of confidence that our allies in the Gulf have about our willingness to defend them against Iran, and therefore they are hedging to China. Again, I'm so glad that you agreed to put all the resources of the Jamestown Institute, Jamestown Foundation behind spreading my article with John Kasapoulou, Overmatch and Tablet Magazine. Thanks, I appreciate that. Because in there we discuss how the Iranian missile and drone offensive regime that they have created with that is really playing into the hands of the Chinese. So the Chinese will actually deliver missiles and drones to anyone who will buy them. And so they're providing missiles and drones to Saudi Arabia. They're selling drones to the UAE. And so they have become part of the military balance in the Gulf in a way that it's really quite surprising. It's superpower malpractice, since we are the #1 producer, or we produce the best drones and missiles in the world. You think we could lock the Chinese out of that market with some of our allies, some of our best allies in the world, or allies who are some of the top customers of our military equipment, and we haven't done that. And not only are they buying missiles and drones from the Chinese, but they're buying a lot of things that I would call defense adjacent, like artificial intelligence and telecommunications and other technologies, and that's really costing us. The UAE's purchase of or decision to go with Huawei for its 5G telecommunications means that it knocked us out of China, knocked UAE out of the F-35 program. That was a $23 billion arms deal with the UAE that they managed to spoil with 5G technology. Now, the UAE knew that they were doing that. They were making the choice between the United States premier fighter program, premier defense program period, or Chinese 5G technology, and they chose the Chinese. That's a hedge. That's a military hedge toward the Chinese.
And Huawei was also on the agenda during Xi's visit in Saudi Arabia.
They signed
as well.
an MOU. They signed an MOU to go with the Saudis did to go with that. So they are competing with us directly, the Chinese.
So the wind is in their sails.
The wind is in their sails, and they have managed to create the impression in the Gulf, and I think correctly, if I were a Gulf leader, I would feel the same way, that they are the rising power and we are the power in decline. And that is I don't think that is at all based on the objective data of American power. If we measured any of the objective indices of American power, it's purely a matter of policy, and it goes back to this question of overmatch and refusing to carry out any offensive countermeasures against Iran, with the sole exception of the Qasem Soleimani raid. By the way, note that we killed Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, not in Iran. We haven't. Iran has the impunity to attack inside any country in the Middle East. Nobody ever attacks inside Iran, which is quite interesting, actually. Except we'll say attack inside, the Israelis have carried out, of course, clandestine operations against Iran's nuclear program and other facilities.
And in Syria, they attacked a
with
drone
impunity.
facility that was being produced.
Attack with impunity against the Iranians in Syria, but and they carry out clandestine actions inside Iran. Now, under the Bennett-Lapid government, they appear, nobody knows for sure. Nobody tells us what the actual calculations of the Israelis are, but we saw under Trump, under maximum pressure, a significant tempo of clandestine operations, presumably carried out by the Israelis against Iran, and those didn't end completely after Biden came in, but the tempo seems to have decreased significantly. I would expect with the return of Netanyahu that the tempo will increase, and that's going to increase friction between Washington and Jerusalem. And we also now have Republicans in the House, and so they're going to have a few key committees. So there's an opportunity for those of us who feel that offensive countermeasures against Iran are a requirement to team up with the Israelis and members of the House to put more pressure on the administration and to ask it to actually come clean about what its real calculations are about its Iran engagement. I think that's going to be very interesting in the next year.
Do we have any more other questions online? Is there?
No more online ones.
Okay.
I didn't actually maybe fully answer the one question about Gen Z, and I just say this. Obviously, the regime in Tehran has for a long time been unable to connect with the younger generation. That is true on things like hijab, but it's also very true in terms of the state of the economy. So, the Islamic Republic has not focused or prioritized job creation or living standards improving. The opposite has happened. So if you look at the data in terms of absolute poverty or just general poverty, things have gone in the wrong direction. So again, if you're talking about what upsets that young generation, the fact is that they go out to university, they come out, and there are no jobs. And for the last 43 years, the Islamic Republic has relied on people just getting on a plane and emigrating, but not everybody can emigrate. And you see that particularly in the rural areas, a lot of these protesters initially began in the smaller communities, not in the big cities. And that tells you that this anger that for a long time used to be concentrated in Tehran and some of the big cities is now all around, and from Balochistan to Kurdistan, Khuzestan, up to Mashhad, and so on. So again, this is not going to go anywhere. I'm not sure if the regime has an economic solution to it. If they really want to find an economic solution, I assume logically they want to fix their foreign policy, get the sanctions lifted to be able to bring some money into circulation and maybe kickstart that economy that's not doing well, hasn't done well for a long time.
Well, I wanted to go back to one question that I had. We're running short on time, but I really want to get this in. If you would have said to me in February of this year, when Russia invaded Ukraine and the Ukraine war started, if you would have told me then that IRGC Doran military officers would be in northern Crimea directing drone strikes into Ukraine, I would have said you were crazy, no chance, never would happen. Now we're having this unprecedented, Friday we had drone strikes, Iranian drone strikes by the Russians using their drones to attack Odessa, knocked 1 million people in Odessa, lost electricity over the weekend just because of these strikes. So you alluded to something here about the changing dynamics of the South Caucasus, that Russia's preoccupied, and because they're preoccupied, there's this Iranian fear that the Turkish influence, that Russia's losing its priorities and focus in the South Caucasus, so therefore they need to step up their efforts. You saw this Pasdaran military exercises, unprecedented near the border of Azerbaijan. Obviously, some signaling going on, and so now you have this internal dissent and civil unrest inside of Iran. So how does the IRGC, what the heck is going on here with them upping their role? And then you're arguing here that they saw these protests, they knew about it for 5 years, did nothing about it. I mean, what does it say about, is the IRGC now kind of in charge of this external policy and direction, or what? Where does the dynamic between Russia and Iran going here?
I think that that what the United States now faces is a Russian, Iranian, and Chinese alignment very clearly. And now we're seeing through the I think I believe that for some time, not just from the statements of Khamenei about his interest in China and in the East. But now we see it really clearly in the military, in the military, in the mill-to-mill relationship, and I think that it's very clear to all of those capitals that that's what they're doing. They have an understanding that they all share an interest in undermining the American-led order, each in its own region, especially. And there's no way. I mean, now that the Iranians came to the aid of Vladimir Putin at his moment of greatest need, when he had a real need, because the Russians haven't invested heavily in attack drones, and the Iranians have, and he needed the capacity to, as you're saying, hit the Ukrainian infrastructure and hit way behind the lines of the Ukrainians. The Iranians came to his aid, That's an incredibly significant geostrategic shift, because it means that Russia is going to be deeply invested in strengthening and perpetuating the Iranian military technologies, and we're looking at not just their technologies, but their defense industries. We're looking at the arrival of Iran on the global stage as a major arms exporter. I have trouble saying the word exporter. They have a relationship already with Russia. We see they have a relationship with Tajikistan. They've had a relationship in the past with Ethiopia, Algeria, Venezuela. All of these are either already on the list or on the way to becoming purchasers of Iranian drones. The U.S. threat perception view of the world, its picture of the threat landscape hasn't caught up yet. Particularly the administration hasn't caught up with that picture.
That's a very good, I can agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, IRGC folks have been working with the Russians going back to the 1990s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Their memories haven't always been good. There are plenty of archival footage where you can see Iranian former or IRGC officers describing the bad treatment at the hands of the Russians. So this hasn't always been a relationship that's been going in the right direction of growth. But certainly since February of this year, an invasion of Ukraine and Russia's isolation, you see a whole new chapter here potentially playing out. And then, I don't know how far it's going to go. There is talk of the Sukhoi 35, I think it is, that Iran, I've seen reports. I have no idea if these reports are true, but some Iranian pilots are being trained to fly these. The Iranian Air Force desperately needs new platforms. And for a long time, the Russians were willing to sell it to Iran, but they needed to know if they could get paid. And maybe the payment issue isn't as important as it used to be a few years ago. And now we can see a flow of new Russian weaponry.
Iranian drones for Su-35.
Maybe that, I don't know what the deal is. What I know is this is potentially a new chapter in relations, certainly military to military. Yeah, obviously the big issue that could shift, which would be very significant, is if Russia's so far opposition to Iran going to and become a nuclear weapon state changes. If the Russian Federation decides, you know what, Islamic Republic that has a nuclear weapon, it's not a bad thing for Russia, that could be, I think, the biggest of changes that potentially could happen. I have no idea if that might be where Russia is heading. And then, Glenn, on Azerbaijan and IRGC, one thing I say about Azerbaijan, if the regime in Tehran needs to be very careful about, which is, I remember the days of the war in the early 1990s, Iranian Azeri population, and I don't want this discussion to focus on Azerbaijan, that I don't think that was our intention, but we've come
always
here.
my intention.
Iranian Azerbaijanis knew that there was this country of their cousins on the other side, but they have been under Russian influence or communist influence for a century or plus. So there wasn't an immediate sort of emotional attachment or wanted to go out there and help the Azeris in that war against Armenia. But the last 30 years, plenty of Iranian Azerbaijanis have crossed the border to places like Baku and Nakhchivan. And certainly among the younger generation, there is an attachment to Azerbaijan, a sense of these are our cousins and we need to be with them hand in hand.
And during the 44-day war between
Right.
Armenia and Azerbaijan, you saw Iranian Azeris on the border cheering Azerbaijan.
Right. So if IRGC thinks they can continue doing what they're doing in Ukraine now and before in Syria and forget about, being closer to the sentiment of their own people, including ethnic Azeris and what they care about, I think they're making a strategic mistake.
Yeah.
That's what my point on IRGC.
Closing point, Mike?
Yeah, just on this issue of the Azerbaijan and the identity in Iran, just a couple of things that, again, I haven't been to Iran. I don't know what it's like on the ground and how people feel, but I've talked to Azerbaijanis who are talking to Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijan who are talking to them in Iran, including members of the IRGC, which is interesting. So some significant percentage of the IRGC is actually ethnic Azerbaijani. And so they
Persianized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, they're not necessarily all that Persianized, but their attitude is they have not gone out in the streets in the numbers that you've seen elsewhere in Iran. And what they say is, we don't want to go out like we did last time, meaning 1979, and help bring down this regime, only to be
Hung out to dry.
hung out to dry, and we get a Persian nationalist regime that comes in, and that's worse for us. Now, if that's I have no idea how widespread that sentiment is, but let's assume for a second, just for the sake of discussion, that that's a very common sentiment. You can see, we know from countries like the former Yugoslavia, where you had apartment buildings with Croats and Serbs and Bosnians all living together in the same apartment house, and all considering themselves to be fellow Yugoslavs one day, and then the violence begins, and suddenly the Croats are identifying as Croats, and the Serbs as Serbs, and the Bosnians as Bosnians. That this is common in the world. So there may be at the moment a sense of unity and a lack of a sense of identity and desire for autonomy, and a few violent events can happen that can change it significantly. And the chance of that happening is even greater if you have a state across the border which is openly identifying as your or two states actually on your border, openly identifying as your ethnic compatriot and concerned about your identity, and willing to help in various ways, whether it's direct intervention or not. So I think the idea that this is that Iran is set in stone currently in its current configuration and will remain this way forever is not a safe assumption. It might be true, it might not be true.
Well, we won't know today, but we will know soon. So we'll keep an eye on it. Our event today has been Iran and it's in turmoil and its implications for its neighbors. We appreciate everybody for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you again. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and hope everyone has enjoyed our discussion. It'll be posted online afterward on YouTube. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.